Hey folks, before we get to the episode, I want to invite you to this month's International Directors Meetup, our monthly gathering of directors and theater makers from around the world. It's a space to share experiences, trade advice, and find support in what can often be a pretty isolating role. You can come and go as you need, drop in late, leave early, whatever fits your schedule. It's simply a chance to set aside time each month to sit alongside others who understand the work. For dates, times, and details, head to boardofdirectors.world and pull up a chair at the table. Join the board. Kareem Fahmy and I have been like ships passing in the night for a long time. We were at Columbia around the same period, but we never actually met. I heard his name, knew work was being made, and then I moved overseas and missed his directing career as it was unfolding. Years later, I encountered him in a different way. I was living and teaching in Egypt, directing and learning alongside artists there, immersed in a culture with an extraordinary creative lineage, one that has given the world voices as sharp, funny, and incisive as actor and writer Rami Youssef, playwright Stephen Adly Girgis, and Yusuf El-Gindi, among so many others. It was in that context that I began encountering Kareem's writing. His plays started showing up in my life before he did. When the university where I was working produced his play, American Fast, Kareem was invited, and somehow, even then, we still didn't manage to meet. His work kept intersecting with my life, even as we remained strangers. So this conversation felt long overdue. And when we finally sat down together, what struck me was not just his ability to move fluidly between writing and directing, but the care with which he thinks about identity, responsibility, and the rooms we build as artists. There's humor here, generosity, and a real precision of thought. I'm grateful we finally closed the distance. This is my conversation with Kareem Fahmy. So, Kareem, we were just talking about that we just barely overlapped at Columbia, but we never actually met. You graduated in 2007.
Yeah, technically 2007. I was in the class that finished in 2006, but because I was an international student, so I stuck around for a year. How about that?
Understood.
So,
yes, exactly.
yeah.
Even then I probably wouldn't have met you because I was stage managing Columbia Productions starting in 2007. So even if, they were there, I wouldn't have seen you.
Yeah.
But even in that kind of overlap, I've never seen your work as a director. And so I've only known you as a playwright.
Mm-hmm.
So when you introduce yourself, do you introduce yourself first as a director or a playwright, or does that change whichever room you're in?
I mean, it depends on, when it's to a person within our field, I usually start with director first because that's who I am in my soul, It's like what I studied, it's what I set out to do, the playwriting sort of, and maybe we'll get to that, but, I wouldn't call it a side quest or a side path, but it certainly wasn't what I expected my career to be. But has been quite interesting that particularly over the last like 3 to 4 years, people they know me as a playwright. It's like, and that says a lot about the state of directing, right?
Right,
It's like
exactly.
how easy it is to be known artistically as a writer versus a director. But yeah, I am absolutely both. And I think actually in my soul, I've always been both. It just took me a while to sort of more professionally say yeah, so I am a playwright, but yeah, I am a director and a playwright. And to me, they're the same, they're the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just call you a storyteller then. Where does that storyteller gene come from? Like, what's the origin story of Kareem Fahmy?
What do you think about the genetics of it? Because I was just with my father just celebrated a milestone birthday. He turned 85 over the weekend. So I was
Congratulations, Dad.
Congratulations, Dad, for sure. And it's funny because, my father long retired, of course, but he was a scientist. My mother was primarily like a homemaker. Both of my older siblings kind of went into sort of science specific and business specific fields. I had this whole other life as a healthcare worker. I got my undergraduate degree in physical therapy and studied science, most of my life. But it was like I was following I think a sort of a familial directive or a familial push, but the creative impulses were always there. Like I mean, even from when I was like a young child. But it's like where they come from genetically is hard to say. You know, my grandmother, my father's mother, who I was thinking about a lot because I was staying in her home. She's passed away, but I was staying in her home in Florida when I was celebrating my father's birthday. And she was a very artistically minded person. She wrote memoir. She really like was a lover of the arts. So I think I'm sure at least from that DNA perspective, some of that came down from her. But I am definitely an anomaly within my family because none of my family, they have like artistic impulses, but they never sort of, they certainly from perspective of theater had no grounding in it. They still don't actually. They don't understand what I do.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting to me. Yeah.
But they were supportive of it. They were
It was a learning curve for all of them, I
okay.
think. I
Yeah.
mean, sure. I mean, look, when you're the child of immigrants, right? No matter, you know, that there's still just there's a different mentality. So, and that was a big part of certainly my professional path, right? That I think maybe I might have started sooner or found it, you know, as a real journey towards a professional practice earlier in my life, had I even thought that would be possible. But it wasn't as if it was discouraged. It's just like it wasn't a thing that I ever thought was possible. Like that's not a career, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a whatever. It is a hobby or an interest or a predilection. It's not a career. So that was a whole other learning curve for me to get to where I am now, sort of overcome that mindset. But yeah, they're all very supportive now. But I believe I don't think they'd be insulted when like when I would say to you publicly right now that I don't think any member of my nuclear family like fully understands what I do.
Of
You know,
course.
they don't understand the creative process. They don't understand the professional arena, and I think that's normal. A lot of people don't understand what theater makers do.
No, they don't. Absolutely don't. So when did you first? I'm imagining that the bug hits as normally does, but when they get into theater, where you were an actor first, maybe.
Yes, but not really. You know, I mean, it's like how you grow up, right? You do your little like drama clubs and your drama classes. So there was acting. I guess there was like a hot minute where I was like, I could be an actor, and like it was actually quite funny because just a couple of weeks ago I did this teaching. Um, I taught a seminar at the National Theatre School of Canada. So you know I'm from Canada, right? And the National Theatre School of Canada is in Montreal, and I grew up near there. So it was always something that I was really excited about. And I remember when I was, I don't know, 18, I auditioned for the National Theatre School of Canada, and I was terrible. You know, I really was terrible. Like they barely even like looked up from the desk. You know, so it was clear to me early on that like I might have enjoyed acting a little bit, but it wasn't my skill set. And ultimately, you know, I think at the core, I was always thinking on a higher level. So there was always writing and directing going on underneath. But no, I never pursued it. I acted in a couple of plays in college, and that was it. And then I absolutely stopped, and I have exactly 0% interest of ever performing. I love reading a play around a table with other writers, but I'm also not very good at that. I just like put a lot of energy into it,
Yeah.
you know.
So from very early on, you knew like, okay, directing. You say directing and writing.
I mean, does anybody know they're a director when they're young? I mean,
I know, right?
you know, like it's such a weird thing to know. But I do like, I mean, I have like memories of childhood of like creating, you know, playground games where I was like assigning people characters. So I mean,
Hmm.
that's directing, right? And
Yeah.
that's strange to think. I mean, I'm talking like grade school stuff, but like you don't know what that is, right? But I think I certainly had impulses towards like a world building. And I it's funny because you know, when I actually every time I go back home, my mother still lives in my childhood home, and you know, I find these things that I wrote when I was very young, and I was like, wait, I wrote this stuff, and like really elaborate stuff. You know, I imagined all of these worlds, but so yeah, it was it was baked in from a very early age, but it took a lot of different forms. So there was writing, there was sort of directing, the creating of things. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know that it was theater until I. And
So you say you have a background in healthcare,
hmm
physiotherapy,
hmm
and at some point you needed to make a jump and
hmm
decide, I'm gonna do this for real.
hmm
Can you talk about that process of like, I'm going to go all in, and from here on out, that's what you've been doing, which is fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I did hang on to my healthcare job to support me for many, many years. I mean, up until just a few years ago, it was like something I did to help support my creative life and profession. I mean, I've my the origin story of the jump, like it's both internal and external, but I actually credit it more to like an external factor, right? Because I was making plays in Montreal, which is where I was living. I studied there, and then, but it was really just out of the joy of making plays. It wasn't out of any professional ambition. And there was, and I still credit her. I don't talk to her very often, but there was a woman that I met. Her name is Claudia. She lives here in New York, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. And like I didn't know her. She was a stranger to me, but she was the aunt of an actor in a play that I was directing at like a little student theater in Montreal. And this very dark, twisted Canadian play called Lion in the Streets by Judith Thompson. And um, I directed this production of the play, and this woman came up to me and she like wrapped her arms around me, and she was like, "You're the director of this play?" And I was like, "Yes, yes, my name is Kareem." She's like, My niece is in the play," and I was like, "Oh, your niece is wonderful." She's like, "You, what are you doing? Like this is what you should be doing with your life. Like my niece told me you're a physiotherapist. Like, why aren't you a theater director?" I was like, "What do you mean? Like, that's not a job." She's like, "Yes, it's a job. Like, people do this for a living." And it was like, you know how it is? It's like that thing where somebody just gives you a little push, right? And then when she said, "No, I live in New York. I'm an actor. I'm a casting director. I've spent my whole life devoted to theater. And the work that you're doing here in your little student theater in Montreal is up to the caliber of work I see in New York all the time. This is what you should be doing." And I mean, so she really did plant that seed. And she's like, "Here's my number. Give me a call if you have questions." And I did. I think I called her a couple of weeks later and I just said, "Claudia, if I were to explore this professionally, like what should I do? Like, what is the path?" I was so clueless, right? And she's like, "Well, what do you think you need?" And I was like, "Well, like, I'm just an amateur. Like, I love theater and I make plays, but like, I don't really know the nuts and bolts of it." She's like, "Well, maybe you want to go to school and like study theater." I was like, "People study theater in school?" Again, I mean, maybe I'm making myself out to sound more naive than I was, but I was pretty naive about this stuff, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And also, growing up in Canada, I mean, I already mentioned the National Theatre School. There are very few places, and this is actually still true to this day, where you can study theater directing at a graduate level. Like, I
Yeah.
think there are still only one or two programs in all of Canada. I mean, Canada is a much smaller country than the US. So Claudia, being American, she was like, "Well, here are some examples of places where you could go and get an MFA in theater directing if you wanted to." And she listed a bunch of places, and I did a bunch of research. But that's where it started. It literally started from that day when she gave me the hug and she gave me her number. And I became quite committed to the idea that like I needed to at least pursue the master's degree because I thought it would give me a sense of like if this was right. And then the rest is, whatever, history. I don't know if you call it history. It's still going.
It's still
But
going.
yeah, that led me to applying to graduate schools. That led me to Columbia. And then it really, yeah. Well, because I mean, but also, I was convinced I would just go back to Canada immediately after finishing graduate school. But then because Columbia is where I ended up going, I was a finalist the first time I applied. I really felt an affinity to Anne and to the people there. I was also, you know, finalist at other schools too, but I became quite committed to the idea that I wanted to be in New York. I loved the city.
Yeah.
And
Same.
then it just like it bit me so quickly that within months of being here, I thought, "Oh, I can't leave."
Yeah.
Going back to Canada would have felt like even though I love Canada and I miss it, like it would have felt like a step backwards
Hmm.
in terms of like the access I had. And then it just took me 20 plus years to figure out, how to stay here and make a life here. But that's what I'm doing.
So this entire time you are in a way teaching yourself directing before you actually start grad school, kind of
Yeah,
just figuring out same way, do the same thing. You're also writing things for yourself at that time, or you're doing others' work? A little bit of both.
both,
Both.
both.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I very early on. was direct. Like, I guess you could say I started working on new plays way back in Montreal, but it was because there was a very engaged theater community in Montreal, which is kind of an anomaly because it's a French speaking city, but there was this very engaged community of English speaking people, largely, situated around the universities and other places too. And so I kind of fell into the directing part a little bit more only because, writers were looking for directors to work with them. But again, I knew nothing. Didn't know how to direct a new play. I directed a lot of canonical work. That's how I kind of like made my mark. And then I did write, but I wasn't, it's funny because I guess like when I look back on it, I was a writer director way back then, but the writing somehow felt like secondary to the directing. I wasn't thinking deeply about how to write. I was thinking more about creating a blueprint for something to direct. That's of course shifted in the intervening years. But yeah, I mean, even back then, I had a little theater company in Montreal and I directed, canonical plays. I wrote a couple of plays of my own that I then directed and produced. So yeah, all of it's funny. Like when I really look back, all of the stuff I'm doing now, I was doing back then, but it did feel like I then went on a very circuitous journey to land back to kind of where I started.
I find that so often when I'm interviewing directors and speaking about kind of the origin story of saying, like, in a lot of ways, I feel like the first thing I directed was the best thing I ever directed because I didn't know right or wrong or what was, and then the circuitous path of like figuring out how it should be done and then getting back to that kind of origin. I find that to be true. So from that not knowing kind of thing and teaching yourself directing and teaching yourself playwriting as well, when you were writing early on, probably not now, were you writing things that you knew that you could direct your way out of? I do not consider myself a playwright, but I have written
Mm-hmm.
plays, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that when what I'm writing, I can solve in the room as a director, that I don't necessarily have to solve it on the page. Did you find that? Or do you still find that?
I mean, it's hard to know back then. I think back then I was writing more towards the stories and the ideas that felt very palpable to me. Like I've always been kind of like an emotion first artist, right? So I think about the various things that felt really big and dramatic in my life at that moment. They were usually about some dramatic relationship or some dramatic friendship or something very fraught that became the sort of subject matter of the things I was writing about, right? And so, in a way, the writing and the directing felt the same because they were all in support of just excavating that feeling and bringing it to life on stage. Whereas now it's a very different beast, right? Because I actually I'm not I don't actually write with the idea that like this is my piece to direct, even though I'm starting to move towards that. I'm actually finding myself more and more nowadays writing things that are almost impossible to direct, and I don't see them. And I love that, right? I still have an inkling that like, oh yes, there is a way to bring this to life, but I'm actually much more interested in the theatrical challenge of writing a thing that is going to activate a director's imagination. And that
Yeah.
could be my own,
Yeah.
right? But I'm not writing as if I am the director already,
Okay.
Yeah, I want a challenge.
Yeah, same. I met a playwright from the playwriting program at Columbia who wrote some of the most impossible things. He was like the love child of Chuck Me and Sarah Kane, and it just activated me immediately. And like he would create these challenges that he thought I couldn't solve, and that was probably the best relationship to come out of that school was that
That's great.
thing as a challenge, a playwright to give to them. I'm thinking of, I was reading something about how you love stories that take place inside of buildings or they're kind of stuck in a society of those kind of things. Are those the kind of challenges that you're talking about of like, what does it mean to live inside of, or what does it mean to break free from?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably referencing a couple of the plays that I wrote that are set in these very specific real world places. And I think that's like a chapter that I've in a weird way and I'm starting to move through, but I think I in my writing, I'm really interested in how to invite an audience into something that feels really tangible And I think particularly in the early phase of my writing career, the plays that sort of put me on the map, they were kind of very rooted. Like they were very like, oh, okay, here's a building, here is a set of rules that you understand. This is the real world. So that I could then craft the sort of emotional complexity that I wanted, and to make that sort of messy and complicated and challenging, right? And now, as I get further along, I mean, I'm still drawn to a sense of place, right? But I've just noticed in the last couple of things that I've written, boy, are they like totally unmoored from place and sometimes even unmoored from time. So I think I'm luckily enough, like getting enough creative freedom artistically to kind of like, oh, okay, I have a body of work now. And part of that body of work is very interested in geography and place and architecture and these things that feel really grounded. And now I can be like, and now we're in a big, vast open space. And like, how does this live on stage? And again, like everything I'm doing, I find is for me to feel creatively engaged in a new problem and a new juicy experiment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm really not interested in repeating myself, either as a writer or as a director. I just get bored.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I just get really, really, really bored. So there's a lot there that I keep exploring. Like, I know that at the bedrock, what I'm really interested in is sort of complexity of human emotion and like the various choices that we make out of all of that emotion that roils within us. I don't like directing plays about ideas. I don't like writing plays about ideas. But the sort of container for those emotions that I'm interested in exploring could live in a real place like, the library where my play A Distinct Society is set, or, a room in the Hotel Ritz Paris where my play Dodi and Diana is set, or, my new play, Riparian States, which is set in, 2 dozen different locations, some of which are completely, abstracted. But there's still a signature to what I'm doing with them, with the character work and with the emotional work, I think.
And what is it that you're drawn to as a director? I mean, I understand the complex human emotion, but
Yeah.
there's a yes and there's a no column of I'm not going to take this kind of play, or I'm not interested in doing this kind of play. What's a theme or something that you're continuously gravitating toward, or what's a question that you're trying to answer with that body of work as a director?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's less about theme and it's much more about form and style, and that sounds a little rigorous. It's not even that. I think it comes back to, particularly when you look at like the state of like contemporary playwriting. Let's just limit it to North America for now. I think there are, and I mean, I began to understand this even very early in my career, even when I was in school, is that there are writers. I'm talking about both canonical and contemporary, whose point of view or whose approach is primarily character based versus, let's say, idea based, right? Idea or theme based. Then there are people who are very language forward, right? Or, something that feels basically like experimental, where like language isn't necessarily even a vehicle for character or thought, Like I've worked with writers who are like, I don't write characters, I just write words. And so I think within all of those categories, I think I really gravitate towards plays and texts that are excavating character and emotion primarily, right? And then something that feels like reflective of a deep societal conversation. Like, so if a play is too enamored of its own style or enamored of its own language or enamored of its own rhetorical ideas, I generally am not the right director for those. But if I'm interacting with a play and it is making me feel a thing, if I'm feeling a deep empathetic bond to like a character or a problem within the play that is like reflecting something in society that I am also curious about, I'm also passionate about, then usually that Venn diagram starts to feel more and more like a circle, which isn't to say I'm totally opposed to like language forward plays or, but like if a writer that I'm working with is going to be a bit more focused on, whether the language sounds a certain way, I'm probably not going to be right for that. Do you know what I mean? And that's totally like, and I support and love any writer, to approach anything the way they want to do it. But like, I just know where I thrive,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like where I am a good fit. And that's something that just like is like you learn by doing, right? And and it's not necessarily always in alignment with what I write, by the way. It's like I do work outside of that as a director all the time, but it's the heart wants what the heart wants ultimately, right?
Of course. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We recently had on Peron Yusufzada
Hmm.
on the
Yeah, my good
podcast.
friend. Yeah.
You started Maya Directors with.
Hmm.
And something that we talked about in her episode, and something I want to ask you about as well, of your parents are immigrants from Egypt to Canada, and
Hmm.
then you growing up in Canada and then coming to America in the time period that I'm imagining you're growing up in,
Yeah.
coming to America.
Yeah.
Can you talk about when cultural background felt like an opening and sometimes when it felt like a constraint, and how you've been able to navigate that in your work especially?
I mean, I think that has probably been the biggest single influence on my trajectory as an artist, which came as a complete like surprise. That truly was, I wouldn't say it was necessarily like a switch had been flipped, but it felt like that in terms of my the feeling of who I was as an artist, which was still, developing because it was nascent and it was new, but like what I was interested in, what I was making, how I was perceived as an artist back home in Canada versus what happened when I immigrated. Well, it didn't start as immigration, right? Because I came to, New York for school. And then once I decided like, oh, this is, I think is my home now, I had to go on a deep and at times like very fraught and very complicated, which is ongoing, right? Of like by being here, i.e., America, my Arabness, right? My Middle Easternness, the fact that my parents, are Muslim and I can identify culturally with Islam, like all of those things became so turned up. The dials on those things got so turned up. It's not like they were at zero in my life in Canada, right? But like there were maybe each of those things were maybe at a one or a two. And certainly creatively, they never were high. I was never turning those dials up because it wasn't part of what I was thinking about. It wasn't my curiosity, right? And then initially, it was like I was blasted. It really felt that way early on. I mean, you also have to recognize, like, I came to New York in 2003. So that's only, 2 years after
Yeah.
9/11.
Right.
There was just like such a kind of different rhetoric. And so for better or for worse, like I was approached, I was sort of like pulled in to a community that was like, there aren't a lot of people like you, i.e., an Arab director, right? There
Yeah.
were very, very few,
Yeah.
particularly Arab, right? Middle Eastern period, Arab, very few, still are, if I'm being really honest. There
Yeah.
aren't
Yeah.
a ton,
Yeah.
And people started encouraging me, asking me, forcing me to, start,
Speak for.
well, yeah, and explore and dig into and identify with. And I mean, I remember those early days going like, huh? Like, like, of course I can understand it from a cultural standpoint, right? But it was like, it suddenly became the thing that people were interested in about me. And I was like, this is just a tiny part of who I am. So it was a hard, like at times very I wouldn't say it was painful, right? But it became this sort of constant push pull of should I speak for my community? Should I like why? Right. And I'm still navigating that, though I'm so glad in a way that those early experiences kind of got me in a pathway because I've really come to take ownership of what it feels like and how impactful it can be to make those contributions, right? But if you had told me before I came to New York that that was the type of work I would be
Uh-huh.
creating, in part, it's not all I do, of course, right? I would have said, oh, you're dreaming. Like, that's not, like I'm not an authority on that. I have nothing to, add to that conversation. And then, project after project and collaboration after collaboration, I got deeper and deeper into those questions. And now it is a big part of what I do and I value it a lot, but it came out of a lot of grief for me, right? It's just this constant double-edged sword that exists to any artist who is, from an underrepresented community, but like the baggage, and it is, I mean, I'm quoting my friend and colleague, wonderful Egyptian playwright Yusuf El Gindi here, but
Mm,
he has spoken publicly and written a really impactful article about the baggage that comes around with being an artist of Arab descent,
yeah,
making work in America,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I've never fully been able to shake off that feeling,
Hmm.
but I have also embraced it too, right?
Hmm.
And that I can now say, because I'm far enough along in my career, that I can say, like, oh, I've actually made a significant contribution to like
Absolutely.
uplifting, right? But I sometimes go like, well, but where am I in that? Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
On a very deep personal level, like, where am I in that? And how, like, I've only ever wanted to just make things that I believe in. I know that sounds sort of like very basic, but it's true as an artist, right? And so when I was steered towards like, but don't you believe in the importance of speaking for your community and blah, 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 and increasing empathy in the world for it? I was like, well, sure, like I can absolutely get behind that, right? But that is essentially one component of what one would hope in me, a much larger, you know, impact one can make. And particularly, I mean, this is a podcast about directing. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how limiting it is as a director to be from my community. I mean, that's my experience. I'm not saying this is true. I can only speak from my experience. But I would say that every single thing that has influenced the trajectory my career has gone on, to a certain extent, I attribute to the fact that I'm a director of Middle Eastern descent, right? Who is making work in America, right? And that the director part of the thing is so complicated and fraught from an industry perspective, right? That it has freed me in certain ways to make different like choices I didn't expect to make, but also I felt has hampered me as well. And that
Hmm.
continues,
Yeah,
and some days I feel really like, oh wow, look at what I'm doing. And other days I'm like, oh, but I could be doing this whole host of other things that do feel
yeah,
sometimes shut off,
yeah, yeah.
right? And I attribute that to my cultural background, which is really, it's kind of fucked up.
It's
You
fucked
know
up.
what I
Yeah, no,
mean?
it
It
is.
is
Yeah.
fucked up. And so it's weird to say that like it's been kind of a huge gift, but also a huge burden. Both things are true
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah.
Like literally every single day, it's a huge gift and a huge burden. And I just try to embrace both of those things. You know what I mean? I don't think it will ever, sadly, I don't believe it will ever not be a burden within my lifetime. You know what I mean? Or at least within the scope of my career. And that's okay. Like I'm starting to really embrace that, but it has changed the trajectory of my career in so many ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about multiplicity and containing multitudes, but then to be continually defined by one sliver of that multitude, to understand that multitude and then go, but I only know one Arab speaking director. I only know one. And then having that be the kind of defining thing about that. I teach devising and
Hmm.
directing here at the university. And I'm continually kind of being asked to kind of teach theory and teach about the companies that do that, and those companies are mostly white and old, and it's one of those things where I don't know if you have an answer for this, but I want to start asking this question: how can we start growing a more diverse directing field, a field of directors where you're not the only one from Middle Eastern descent, where we can kind of encourage that kind of thing? Because directing is already a slice within a slice within a
Yeah.
slice. Thoughts on that? What would have helped
Yeah.
you out along the way? What?
Well, to me, I think it's not, to me, it's a deeper and much more kind of existential issue. And I've talked about this before in other interviews, and I keep coming back to it. And I really don't ever, when I say these things, I never mean them to sound negative. I think they are just a true, at least, let's just, I want to contextualize this before I say it, because I think it requires context, right? So if you are, let's say, a director whose impulses are to sort of devise and create collaboratively, right? There's a sort of set of rules predicating that are different than, say, some of the pathways I've gone down, which are, again, everything's for better, for worse, a sort of not-for-profit and regional theater career that, comes with a certain other set of expectations, right? There are all these different sort of slices of creativity one can find within the field creatively. And then a lot of the things that I just mentioned, as we were previously talking, is really about external industry facing expectations around like who a director is and what they are, right? So I will say that like some of these frustrations that I've named, burden as I named it, come from the fact that like I chose a career path which is like accessing certain types of opportunities, right? In not-for-profit and regional theaters. Okay, so there's that, right? And in terms of the systems that might to sort of uplift directors, more particularly directors of diverse backgrounds. To me, what I have perceived, I think now, finally, after all these years, I think I can speak with some, what feels like not just opinion, but some like really lived specific experience, particularly that I've been also a playwright and seen this scenario from both now the writer and the director's perspective, is that the issue within our field in America is that the director, I think, is not seen as a generative artist
Mm-hmm.
as often. Well, the writer is always a generative artist. Period. End of sentence. There's no debate about that. Right. So certainly if you are a deviser, right, if you run a company, there's a sort of creative authority that you can claim as a director. Right. But in a lot of the work that I have pursued, a lot of the work I've been hired to do, I am essentially a freelance artist working within an institutional model, right? Where really the perception of the director's role is much less artistically minded than it is administrative, managerial, budgetary. There's all of these other things that are the top that I have, again, it's partly an opinion and partly a lived experience, right? Where the access is predicated on all of these things. The access to opportunity is predicated on things that are not about creativity and not
Mm-hmm.
about artistry,
Yeah.
right? And that it is much, much, much harder for most people in the American theater industry to identify what is quote unquote good or successful directing from a creative standpoint.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I just don't know that it is a thing that we have been trained to look for and to understand, right? I will say, I feel like one of the strengths of the American theater is that we have a pretty good nose for interesting voices from playwrights, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's frankly been the reason for my success. People are like, oh, Kareem, you have a voice, you know how to write. And I was like, great, thank you.
Yeah.
But
Also, I'm a director.
people can also, I'm a director. Yeah, well, we'll get to that. But all I'm saying is that, like, I think we have been trained over many generations of the way theater is made in this country to look at playwrights as the generative force, right? And what I keep trying to remind people of when they listen is like, well, what is theater? Right? Theater is a live event. Theater is not words on a page, right? Theater is not a script. Like, I'm in this very weird position now, weird and wonderful position where like now two of my scripts have been published. One of my scripts has come out in print and another script of mine is licensed. And I have these people who can now like buy my book, buy my script and read it, right? And be like, this is Kareem Fahmy's work. And I actually think to myself, gosh, that's not the way I want them to interact with my work at all. Like
Mm-hmm.
to read my play on the, I mean, I'm very proud of the play on the page, but I wrote those plays for people to watch them in a theater,
Right.
right? Theater is
Right.
a live event. I mean, that is what we make as theater artists. We're not making scripts on the page, we're making productions, right? So I've always been baffled and frustrated and whatever by the notion that I often feel that the director is somehow like not the top of the food chain in terms of the sort of creative vision of what is happening, right? So to me, all of these things, all of these factors come back to the idea that we are not great at discerning the director's craft, at supporting the director's craft, at supporting ambitious new ideas, right, in directing. Because, again, speaking in the box I'm talking about, not-for-profit, regional theater, et cetera, right? You can just begin to list all of we have to take care of the staff of the theater, we have to work within a budget, we have to please the audience, we have to XYZ, right? And so as a result, most of what you're doing as a director is managing all of those things, right? And the creativity is probably towards the end of that list of priorities, right? And that, to me, and look, I'm sure you're going to interview dozens of directors who will speak really differently. But I think, coupled with here's a Arab guy, coupled with, oh, we don't really know how to support a director, and here are all the circumstances. It creates, at least for me, this kind of difficult path forward to really feel that, like, the director is an author, right? The director is a true generator, a creator. And it's really odd to me, right? Because, like, if you were to look at theater is a very specific form of creativity, right? But if you move just, one step over into filmmaking, right? Like, which is not that different in the sense of, like, the director is creating the vision for the film and all of that kind of stuff. Look at some of our most celebrated American filmmakers. They are all writer directors, they're auteurs,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where the director's vision is that the guiding force. Do you know what I mean? But somehow in the American theater, it is our gods have become the playwrights, right? And of course, that's not true in many certainly, I mean, just go to Europe.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, look, and now we're getting these shows from London where, like, it's the director's vision. They even name the theater companies after the directors in London sometimes nowadays. It's like, do you know what I mean? Like, we have a few of those. Don't say we have some of them in America, right? But not that are making that impact, right? You get indie. I mean, you get our mentor and Bogart, right? Like, and Bogart is a top tier artist, but she lives in a very specific category within the industry. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? And then you can get a company like Wooster Group. You can get, I mean, of course, like, I'm not saying that there aren't all sorts of these people, but, like, take that mindset, that directorial, authorial mindset, and try to apply that to a not-for-profit or, regional model, or sometimes even commercial theater. I mean, certainly our classmate, Rachel Shafkin, is a person who found that path, right? But so few. So that is the thing that I have identified as the barrier, right? But it's only within a sort of pathway within the field, which is, the pathway that I have been on, that I'm so far down the road that I'm not sure I could find another pathway now. I mean, maybe one day I will, right? But it is a problem and, again, an opportunity, right? Because, like, as I confront the problem in my professional life, I am very slowly and systematically trying to get inside it and have conversations about it. And now I'm just much more emboldened to have those conversations with leaders in the field and be like, I actually think this is a problem. I think it's a real problem. And I actually think it is diminishing our output as American theater artists to not lead with directorial vision, right? To not encourage a generation of young directors to think that they can create that kind of work within a not-for-profit or regional theater model. Like, why not? Why do we have to be continually put into this sort of widget making mentality where it's like, oh, okay, here's the gig that you got, and here's the budget that you have, and here's the 4 weeks of rehearsal that you have, and now just start making all of your artistic compromises right from the jump. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Do you think that I have 3 distinct questions that have come out of this?
I settled.
No, it's great. No, but you're saying everything that because I'm teaching devising, but I'm also in an undergraduate directing program. And so there's a big argument of, are directors a generative artist, or are they a facilitator for the actor's work?
Right.
And I'm
for the act. That's the dialogue you're having. Facilitator for the actor's work.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite interesting. Huh?
Yeah. I mean, certainly, the actor is a tool in the storytelling, and
yeah,
but
major. But,
if all we have is that, we can make theater. That's perfectly
100%. And I love actors, but yeah, that's not. Yeah, the idea that a director is a facilitator for an actor's process, that feels very backwards to me.
I agree. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Do you think, so thinking about this idea of a director being a generative, do you think then staging is something that should be copyrightable and protected?
Well, sure. I mean, because that is one component of how a director is telling the story. I mean, there was a case of that, right? I mean, this is many years ago now, but I do remember that there was one director who's like sort of successfully, claimed that another director had basically like stolen their staging. But yeah, I mean, again, you're asking the complicated question of like, what is the director's craft?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And is it staging? Is it approach? Is it like, how do you qualify it and how do you quantify it?
I know.
And these are the things I think we do so poorly. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about, having conversations about, encouraging new creative approaches to. Like, these are the things. Whereas like we can sink so many resources into playwrights, right? I think if some of those resources were allocated to directors, we would be having different conversations. But yes, to answer your question, yes, right? Like I just saw a play last night, saw Anna Christie directed by, Tommy Kail, and there was a lot of really specific work in there that I was like, okay, that is directorial vision, and that is, not all of it worked for me, but it was like, it had a very strong directorial point of view, right? And me as a relatively discerning audience member be like, oh, okay, I can see that. I can see the directing there. But I just don't know that your average theater goer is thinking in that way.
But that's the thing, because you already pegged it with film. Like I just watched the Mr. Scorsese on Apple, which is a beautiful documentary.
I've heard.
And it's a thing of like, of course, I can always peg a Scorsese film, even if it's not about Italian mobsters in the 1950s. I can tell.
Totally. Shutter Island, whatever it is.
Because there are certain shots and certain things that he does. That's the directorial vision. We know what a Scorsese film looks like. But the same can't necessarily be said for the theater-going audience, with the exception of, your Wilsons and your Anns and, things like that.
Right. But again, people who maybe like, if you go into any room and say, do you know who Martin Scorsese is? Most people would raise their hands.
Yeah.
The same is not true for Robert Wilson or Thomas Ostermeyer or whoever. Like, name some of the great iconic directors of the last 30 years, right?
Even amongst theatergoers. Or even amongst directors as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, again, like, we can name all the reasons why. You can watch a film anywhere. Do you know what I mean? You could you have access to that, right? But that's also the issue, right, at hand, right, is that the director's work is so ephemeral, right, that it's hard for it to ever, I think, again, in my experience, it's hard for a director's work to catch fire, if you know what I mean, right? It's like, when Paul Thomas Anderson, who's one of my favorite film directors, makes Boogie Nights when he's 20 years old or whatever, 26 years old, which is mind-blowing to me. And you watch this like masterpiece of a film, of course he's going to continue to be making great film after film, because people are like, look at the talent, look at the promise, look at the vision, right? Frankly, let's say I directed the most brilliant thing I ever did. How many people are going to see that, right? How many people are going to be able to take that exciting kernel? Whereas, like, honestly, and I say this with like, I feel so grateful and I feel so inspired that it's happened. But it's like, I wrote a play. I mean, I've written many plays, right? But I wrote a play, A Distinct Society, that a lot of people really liked, right? Why? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good play. Is it a great play? I think it is a very good play, okay? But so many freaking people have read that play, have now seen that play because it's been produced 6 times, have taught that play in their classes. Do you know what I mean? A small little, flame was lit and it has kept burning, right? all these years later, I started writing that play in 2019. It's almost 2026. The play just has finished its sixth production. Do you see what I mean? And the little flame that got lit then led to my play American Fast. It led to Dodi and Anna. It led to 3 different commissions, right? And that happened, I don't want to say it happened by accident. I mean, I put a lot of work into it, right? That same flame, if I lit so many matches like that in my directing career over the years. The same trajectory never
Yeah.
transpired. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it
Yeah.
certainly has transpired for certain colleagues of mine. I'm not saying it's impossible, right? But I think at the bedrock, right, is that the work isn't translatable. It's not visible, right, to the masses, right? And we don't know how to discern it, right? So there's a hurdle that directors have to cross to get over, which I think makes it really, really difficult, you know? And maybe, I mean, you know, I don't know. Like, I don't know if I were to start my career all over again, would I have gone more into kind of a devising company model to have the sort of creative freedom to kind of paint in 3 dimensions? I might have, because I've had a couple of those opportunities professionally over the years, and they've been some of the most positive experiences that I've had. But they don't, you know, it's hard to, at least for me, because I decided I was like, oh, this is going to be how I make my living. I was like, oh shit, I could make $20,000 directing one regional production. That's, you know, I got into bed with that notion, and now that's where I live.
So you talked about, I read an interview before, you were talking about Edward Albee and his
Yeah. Oh God.
and his obsession with couches and doors.
One point he's coming, like they're gonna come for me.
It's one of those things where, we had visiting directors. Paula Vogel came in, and she said, we asked the question of, that every director's like, do I need to follow the stage directors, or is it the Albee model or not?
Yeah.
And she said,
Yeah.
well, of course not. It's not just that. I mean, but if I write that there's a couch in the middle of the scene, and you take that couch out for your directorial vision, that's fine. By God, there better be couchness in that
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I love that. I love that as
Harshness. Yeah.
assessment.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
But as you're talking about, that dichotomy where you are a director, but you've been on the other side of the table as a playwright,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
knowing that you struggled for a week or more on just that one line,
Hmm.
how do you balance, or maybe you don't need to yet, that directorial vision of going like, I actually see a dramaturgical problem that I could probably fix with the directing,
Hmm.
with the honoring of the work itself? Not wanting to, is it a thing of, I need to figure out what they were looking for, or is it exegetic or eisegetic?
Yeah.
Ultimately is my question.
I mean, I think, and this is something I grapple with so much now because I'm on both sides of it, right? It's like, I mean, any, so you have, let's say, a scenario where, which I've now experienced from a lot of different permutations, where I can speak from either the director's standpoint or the writer's standpoint in a collaboration,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if I'm a playwright in a room and I'm not directing my own work and I'm working with a director, all of these conversations become very fertile and tactile, right? Because I can say, oh no, you don't need the couch, but you need couchness. Or, oh no, you know what, that stage direction, if it's not that, then it's not the play, right? There's all of these
Mm-hmm.
negotiations, moment to moment to moment, right, that lead to a result. And frankly, I'm a big believer that if you, I mean, that's why I think I've quoted that Albee thing so many times, is because it stuck with me as this idea that there was a rigidity to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that basically prevented the director from having a sort of creative point of view on anything. If I say the couch is red, the couch is red. If I say there's 2 steps down to the landing, it's 2 steps down to the landing, right? So I'm very, very mindful on both sides of that equation of like, where is the perfect fertile ground for collaboration, creativity, and experimentation? Do you know what I mean? What is what is has to be true for the thing to be the thing, and what are all of the variables, right? And I think that especially like if you're a very young director or early career, I should say, not literally young in age, but sort of like still figuring out, I think there can oftentimes, and I've certainly lived this experience that like a stage direction or a writer's set of guidelines feel like a stifling of creativity as opposed to an unlocking of creativity. Do you know what I mean? And the old adage, like the first thing the director does is take out a black Sharpie and cross out all the stage direction, right? Like I think that's really foolish because, of course, there's so much interesting information what one can glean from those things. And if you're not working with a writer in the room, if you're working on, a text that, the writer is long dead, you have so many ways of inviting in the playwright's invitation. I like to use the word invitation. It's my favorite word to use, right? As like I am inviting you as the writer, I'm inviting you to explore these ideas, right? But if they are bedrock, if they are fundamental to like what the story is, who the character is, I do think it's important to honor those things. And I think a big part of the craft of directing is to figure out which those are if you don't have access to the writer. Do you know what I mean? And it's very easy to approach directing as a series of tricks, right? And a series of approaches, as opposed to, again, you take it or leave it, right? Because, this has just been what I've always been interested in as a director is like, I'm actually really interested in what is true, like what feels true. And I think truth emerges out of like a deep and sort of soulful exploration of everything that is there. So it doesn't have to be actually a direct response to something that is written in the text or a stage direction, but it is like a truthful appreciation for the thing that you are exploring. If that makes sense,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it takes so much experience on both sides of that table to understand how to clarify what that truth is and how to actually dig it out. And I think that's hopefully like the life's mission, but particularly now that I'm in this weird stage of my career where like productions of my plays are starting to happen and I'm not there, I think very, very soulfully and very carefully about every single thing that is on that page, both lines and punctuation and stage directions, because what is an ideal invitation to a director, designers, actors, that they're going to feel free and open to create and be creative and meet my text and my ideas part way, but also keep the bedrock truth of what the story is and what the characters' experiences are. So I think about that a lot, a lot. And it's made me a much more sensitive director. It's made me much more sensitive, having been on the writing side of the equation, to look at every single thing that's in a text and really grapple with it, like truly grapple with it. And then I can still choose to discard it, but I grapple with it.
Yeah.
And I encourage my collaborators to grapple with it, right? Because again, I'm looking for the truth of what is actually happening. And if I just disregard it, or if I say like, I'm going to, apply a filter in general to the whole thing and only look
Mhm.
at it through this. I mean, you can have a directorial approach, you can have a directorial vision, but if that causes a sort of filter which allows the truth of the play to get obfuscated,
Yeah.
it's not going to be successful, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because
I
audiences
made
feel truth. They feel
Yeah.
it when it's truthful,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
Yeah. I made the mistake of I've done a lot of Shakespeare and classic plays and love working with that. And I'm really hesitant to cut anything.
Sure.
Obviously a lot of it needs to be
Any
cut.
text, you mean? Yeah. Yeah.
One of those things of saying like, okay, be very, very purposeful in these cuts because, the kind of the Peter Sellers approach of saying like, I direct the play from the obscure passage, the thing that nobody understands. That's where I direct it
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm very, very purposeful in that. But when it comes to new works or with a playwright in the room, I am very adamant. Do you need this line? Do you need this line? And I made that mistake very early on in the career of saying I prefer working with dead playwrights, not because I don't like working with living playwrights, but a sense of there's a real, sometimes, not always, a rigidity of, well, no, I wrote this. It has to be that way. And I've learned a very powerful lesson in that since then.
You just have to find the right playwrights to work with.
Exactly, and I have. When you enter into the rehearsal room, like I said before, the podcast is really concerned with how
Yeah.
we be a director. What do we need to do to enter the room? The actors have their warm up, and they spend a great deal of time getting ready. What is it that we as a director
Yeah.
do, and who do you need to become to enter
Yeah.
into the room to be the best
Yeah.
satellite dish for the performers? Before you
Yeah.
walk in the room, like, what is it that like you need to prepare yourself to do to be every single time?
Like a sort of incredibly open, responsive vessel to everyone's ideas and feelings. To me, I've just noticed over there, because I think I started in an opposite place. Like, I mean, when I go way back, I was like, I would come in. Boy, do I remember. I mean, things I did at Columbia where I had pre-planned every blocking move. I had looked at every word stress. I had, it's like I had created the production in my imaginative space
Uh-huh.
without any collaborators.
Yeah.
I would say at this point, I am like maybe a full 180 from that. I don't, I hate to say this publicly, I don't prepare a lot anymore. I don't do, like when I'm directing, I don't do like 1,000 hours of research. I don't read the play 50 times. Don't, like, I try to have enough preparation to have so many ideas bubbling up there. And then when I walk in the room, I am listening
Yeah.
to
Present.
everything. And I'm actually listening not so much to like what the actors are or the designers, the stage manager are like doing moment to moment. I'm listening to like how they are feeling into the room. Because to me, a successful production, whatever the production is, if it's a new play, if it's a canonical play, whatever it is going to come out of the most successful collaboration, right? And you as the director, you're the thing that you do, like you can't control how an actor acts. You can't control how a designer, you can encourage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately their craft is their craft. The thing that you can create, and that I believe it's a director's responsibility to create, is a truly collaborative environment where everybody's ideas are welcome, but it's not just ideas, like where their emotional truth is, right? Because what we do as theater collaborators, right, is that like we are extending a part of ourselves into the collaborative process, right? It's not, I don't believe it's just professional. I actually believe that like it is, you know, you can do it in degrees, right? Like you can give up 50% of your emotional capacity to it. You can give up 90%. You can give up 5%. But part of you is on the line when you're a theater artist of any discipline of what we do, right? And what the director's responsibility is, in my standpoint, is to sort of invite a soulful, deep, rigorous collaboration, right? So I am listening with my heart, I am listening with my ears, I'm listening with my brain, I'm listening with my instincts, right? And I'm gathering a lot of information. And so that's what I try to do. And so that's why I don't prepare so much, because I feel like if I come in hyper prepared and like ready to like drive the thing down the road to the destination, I lose all of that information. Do you know what I mean? So that's like the thing I prepare myself for, just from like a mental standpoint and emotional standpoint, to be responsive and open and as generous as possible, which is not always easy for me. Like, because again, that's the hard thing about being a director, is that you still have to drive the ship, right? But you don't want to be driving it so hard that you're not allowing for exploration. So it's a mindset. It's like really like an interesting mindset. And it's so active, right? Because you can't ever turn it off when you're in the rehearsal room. It comes back to one of the first things we talked about, is like the director is always alone. You don't have a person supporting that unless you have a really good assistant or associate, which I've been lucky enough to have, who bolster you, or an amazing stage manager who is like seeing that process and facilitating that, right? Boy, it's lonely and it's hard, but it can also be really joyous
Mm-hmm.
if you allow it to be
Yeah.
joyous.
But it is draining at the end of it. You just
Exhausting.
absolutely. I
Exhausting. Yeah.
I I didn't do a lot of assisting. I have
Nor did I.
a lot of issues with that, but I did
Yeah.
stage manage a lot of things. And I remember being in a production where the director came in fully prepared and had all things mapped out, all answers mapped out. And the actor tried something new, and it was actually really beautiful and spontaneous. And the director was like, whoa, whoa, stop, stop, stop. What did you do there? I don't have you doing that. I have you doing this. And I could literally see the actor's shoulders slump and
Yeah.
realize, oh, I'm just a puppet in the vision. And from then on out, I said, well, okay, that's the greatest lesson I've learned as directing from being that stage manager.
We'll see. And it ties back to the whole like fear of directors and fear of director auteur, because that is the stereotype of what a theater director is like,
Right.
right?
Right.
That everything is this rigorous. the actors are these puppets. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's actually false. I mean, maybe
Absolutely.
it's like the fact that like there are a few directors like that, sure, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
sure there are a few film directors who are like utter tyrants or whatever, who there's no room for collaboration. But I think that's the fear of directors,
Yeah.
is that they are like that and they're not collaborators, right? And so if you over empower a director, they turn into a tyrant. And then the actors feel stifled and the designers feel stifled and the staff feels stifled. But it's a mindset. It's actually a fallacy. It's totally false for most of us. But I think it is sort of like, dare I say, like almost poisoned our sense of us as artists, right? Because I think for a director to be a true artist, they have to have everything mapped out and be a tyrant, right? And that's just false.
That's
It's just
wrong.
not the way it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what our industry can do better is like support directors to be deep in their exploration, right? And rigorous. But that takes a different type of support, that I think most people don't feel it's worthwhile of their time to think of supporting directors in that.
Sadly.
Sad, right? So not sad. I want this to be a very positive conversation. It's just true.
It's reality. That's what it is.
It's reality.
Currently.
Yeah.
That's
And that's why the more we talk about it,
Yeah.
the more it can spur one new idea, one little change in perspective. And then those things add up.
Yeah. A question I ask at the end of every podcast, prompted by a student who floored me with this question just in the hallway one day. And it's one of those things where like, it took me hours to answer this question. And to her, it probably looked like I was ignoring her, but it was such a deep question that I had to actually think about it.
Great.
Really
So
deeply.
I have to answer it in what, like 2 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Timer, start the timer now.
Maybe it's not a deep question, but I appreciated the thought behind it. Anyway, what is a show that changed who you are? It changed the way that you make work. So there was Kareem before the show and there was Kareem after the show.
You mean like a thing that I saw?
Yeah.
Like an actual... I mean, there have been some very, very potent... It's like, I have a hard time picking one of anything, right? Yeah. It's like, what's your favorite play? Who's your favorite director? No. I mean, so
just
hard.
One of the most impactful, like literally your work changed after, or you as a person changed after this. And obviously it changes the person, it does change your work.
It's just, there are those various stages of your career where you have those experiences. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to answer the question only because it's something I've been thinking a lot about very, very recently. And it's actually kind of it's turning into this kind of beautiful full circle moment. I am revisiting a play that I have lived with probably longer than any other play I've ever lived with in my career, which is a piece that I saw when I was 16 years old, maybe. That is an adaptation of a book of poems called The Collected Works of Billy the Kid by Michael Ondaatje, which became my thesis play at Columbia, after much negotiation with Anne Bogart, who, asked me what I was contemplating. And I said, and I'll get to the production in a second. I was like, I saw this production when I was young and it opened my eyes. And then she's like, don't do it. It's a bad idea, Kareem. Like, don't, because you're going to try to replicate this thing that you saw as opposed to having your own interpretation of it. And I was like, give me a chance. I think there's something here for me. And I had to I had to do I ended up doing like a proof of concept, like 45-minute version of this thing. And I presented it to her in my second year and she's like, I was wrong. You have to do this. Like, this is your story to tell. And then I ended up doing it as my thesis. And it's like lived with me all of these years because I went to Columbia a heck of a long time ago, as we talked about. And now I'm revisiting the piece again in a little while, right? And I was picking up the script and looking through it again and it's like full of emotion. And I was saying to my husband, John, I was telling him, oh, you're working on this Billy the Kid piece again. And I think that seeing that production when I was 16 years old, and you know what's so shameful? I'm going to have to see if I can find this information. I don't know who directed it. I don't know, because it was a student, it was at a student theater. I grew up in French-speaking Canada, right? And the only place I had access to English language theater where I grew up was like at this university theater. There's no professional English language theater in my hometown. I didn't have access to it unless I went to Montreal, and it was a student production. It might have been directed by a professor. I think it was actually. But point being, I mean, that was so long ago. I mean, we're talking close to 30 years. And I remember what seat I was sitting in. I remember like what my physical relationship was to the actors. I remember the various visual imagery that like affected me. And I remember performance, I remember music, I remember movement. And there was this palpable moment. There was this palpable moment where, I mean, it was literally a moment of a gunshot because, you know, it's a story about Billy the Kid and it deals with his death. And Billy the Kid was famously, you know, assassinated, killed by
Uh-huh.
Pat Garrett with this rifle. And they actually had a rifle. I mean, it's probably the type of thing you don't do anymore. And it had, you know, a blank round in it, right? And it fired. And of course, all of the air in the room shifts, right? And I was so gobsmacked by this. The whole event was gobsmacking, but then that event. And it was like that first moment, I think, I mean, I attribute it now, where I was like, this is what theater can do. This is what an event, a live event can do to you. The fact that I can remember 30 years later, and of course, I've had several, but it was because it was the first, I think, like there is a I think a truth. Again, I'm obsessed with truth. That like if I hadn't seen that production when I was young, I don't know if I would be sitting here doing this interview with you, right? Because it was like it really was that impactful for me in terms of like how it opened me up, right? So again, I was too young to know what to do with it at the
Yeah.
time, but I think the reason I keep revisiting this project, the reason I was so passionate to explore at Columbia, the reason that I'm now, all these years later, picking it back up and taking a new approach to it is that like it was both the story and the themes and the emotion and the presentation of that story that showed me the power of the live event
Uh-huh.
as interpreted by a director. I just want to say, like, don't get me wrong, I love the text of that. It's beautiful text, but it was that directorial approach that has left that impact. That's what I remember. So yeah, so I would for today, I think I would have to pick that only because I've been reflecting on that production and how impactful it was because I still haven't gotten over it, you know? So here I am. Yeah.
So then to give a little more credence to director's vision, who are three directors that are exciting you right now? Who are three people that are, I don't say three, but who are directors that are really like, anytime they're doing something, I'm going to go see that, or I really like what they do continuously,
Hmm.
or they challenge me or surprise
You
me.
talking about American directors or just directors anywhere
Just anywhere in the world.
anywhere all over the world?
Yeah.
I mean, the director that I, you know, would basically just like worship at his feet if I ever got a chance to meet him is the Italian director Romeo Castellucci.
Oh, same. Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, it's just like, you know, it sounds very theater podcast to like name check Romeo Castellucci, but you know, because it's like talk about like raise your hand in a crowded room who's heard of Romeo Castellucci.
It's
Well,
okay.
because it's like every production of his that I've seen has had that similar impact in some ways where I'm like, I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't, and it's all directorial vision. I mean, talk about auteur, right?
Yeah.
You know, writer, director, big vision, right? So it's like I miss the days where, you know, he would bring his work to New York more often.
Uh,
But yeah, I mean, I just think that's a kind of creativity and a kind of imagination that's writ so large and so singular that you just don't know how one does it. Do you know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm deeply, deeply, and even though the work I make is nothing like his,
Same.
boy, I would go to the ends of the earth
I have.
to see what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so he's a really, really big inspiration to me. Oh God, I'm so bad with lists like this, you know, because then I always feel like I'm like, you
Leaving
know,
somebody out, or yeah.
leaving somebody out. I mean, I always have to give, you know, props to my boy Robert Lepage from, you know, Montreal or Quebec City, technically. Because again, I think he is one of those directors that I interacted with his work very, very early on. And it was that type of auteur driven, big vision. So it's similar to Castellucci, but I just think the work that he has made throughout his career, and I know he can be controversial to some people, is so soulful, right? And so impactful. And again, it's like every production of his that I've seen, I remember where I saw it. I remember what I was feeling when I saw it. And that to me is the power of great directing, is that the story, the feelings that you have when you're watching it can live inside you, you know, over time. I mean, that's extraordinary, right? I mean, that's absolutely extraordinary. So, how many people do that? And I'm trying to think of an American director just because I wanna,
Bring a little closer home.
well, I do. And it's like, and I mean, like, I have so many wonderful colleagues and so many friends, a lot of these people I know, really, really well. And it's like, the thing is, it's like, I think the reason I gravitate towards these non-American directors is all of the stuff I've been talking about this whole interview, right? Is like how many American directors are given the sort of platform to engage and to work on that sort of deep level of big vision when, as I know what the process is. You're cranking out a show in 4 weeks. Like, how deep can you really go and how much can you apply? Um, God, I feel stumped by this question because I'm really just trying to pick an American, and my brain keeps going to all of these Europeans, which is again so not, but I think I'm gonna have to go with another European director
Before it's
to,
fine.
to be just like, very truthful and pick Ariane Manouchkine, just because, again, I mean, it's like and talk about, like, I can't even imagine what her process is like, right?
Mm.
Because
Hmm.
she's like living on the commune with all of her
Right,
artists or
exactly.
whatever, you know
Yeah.
what I
Her
mean?
family.
Yeah, and creating this sort of these elaborate, deep, long things, but they feel so intimate. I mean, that's the thing that I've always found so. And again, this is the reason I get obsessed with these directors whose crafts I can't even begin to fully comprehend, because they're created in a context that are so different than the way we tend to create here in America, right? She's literally living on a commune with her creators, right? So she can create a piece like Les Ephemeres, which is one of my favorite
Oh,
things I ever saw.
same,
But again,
same.
I saw that piece 15 years ago. I remember, I remember like how I felt. I remember where in St. Anne's
Yep.
Warehouse I was, not St. Anne's Warehouse, Park Avenue Armory. Like, I remember all of those things, and I remember the grandiosity of it, and then I remember the intimacy of it. I remember feeling like I'm watching. I don't know if you remember, but there were those like floating discs, and they would come out, and then they would, like, all the ensemble would like gather the furniture, and suddenly you'd be living in this little scene, right? Do I remember the content of any one of those individual scenes? I actually don't. But I remember how deeply connected I felt. And I attributed it all to her and her
Yeah.
direction and her vision, right? Because she was able to take the big and then make it very small and then go back in. And like, that is craft of
Yeah.
directing, right? It is the ability to control an audience's perception, right? To work with the actors and the designers to find deep truth and create a theatrical event, which is like not even a thing we've talked about in this podcast. That, like, again, I think gets missed in a lot of American directing approaches, is that you are creating an event, right? And I think all of these three directors that I've named, but her in particular, when you interact with her work, you are like entering an event, right? So yeah, I get excited talking about it. So yeah, it's and again, I say this with all the love in the world to all of the wonderful directing happening in America and all of my colleagues. But I think, my soul is drawn to these kind of more auteur visionaries. And I'm
Yeah.
not these. Like, that's not who I am,
Yeah, you're right.
but I like, maybe one day, you know what I mean? Or, it's like I'm just gonna give a quick shout out, and I know we have to wrap up, but like, I went to Hungary of all places because a friend of mine lives in Hungary. And my friend took me to, like, oh, we're gonna take you to like the Steppenwolf of Hungary, right? I was like, that sounds cool. And I saw the work of this like very young director writer. He's like shockingly young, and it makes me really angry. But he did this like 4-hour show in Hungarian, which is completely indecipherable language, had super titles, and I was just like, utterly captivated the whole time. And my friend knew him. So I was like, I need to meet this guy. And we had lunch a couple of days later. I was like, who are you? How do you do this? He's like, yeah, well, I work at the State Theater and it's a state-run theater and I'm on salary and I created this play over 6 months and I had all these research funding. And I was like, well, there you go. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, he was don't get me wrong. He is a brilliant artist, right?
But the support structure to allow that.
Yeah, Yakub Tarnowski, got to name him. He's brilliant. We've stayed in touch. But it was a support structure that allowed him to create something that was really, really specific and really vision forward and really detailed. But like, I don't know how an American director, unless, again, you live in the kind of, dare I say, niche category of auteur-driven, company-driven, like Liza Lecomte gets to do that stuff, right? But do you know what I mean? Again, that's tiny, that's here, right? So all to say, yeah, it's my, and when I say all this, it makes it seem like even more like, oh, the director isn't treated like an artist, but I use these examples to say, like, I actually think all of this is very possible in America and in not-for-profit and in regional, like all of this stuff is possible. Only if you frame the director as creator and not a facilitator. Directing, this idea that directing is an interpretive art, directing is a creative art. Yes, interpretation is part of that, but directing is, to me, the most creative discipline in the theater field, right? The text is vital, but the text is in conversation with the directorial. So I hope that we keep supporting how the next generation of directors and our generation too can keep finding those big visions. I think it's vital.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. I love that. It's a great way to
frame it. Yeah, maybe. We'll see.
Inshallah. I think of inshallah as a very hopeful, God wants this, God will will this into existence. Yeah.
Kareem, I could talk to you forever, especially if we want to start talking about the theater event. I could talk to you forever about this.
That's next time. It's so fun. Thank you so much for having me. It's a really fun conversation.
I really appreciate you agreeing to come on, and I'm really happy that not only will this is an international podcast, and obviously a lot of listeners in the U.S., but also a lot of my students in Egypt will be very happy to hear from you as well. So,
please reach out to me, students in Egypt. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was so fun.
If this episode gave you any insight, inspiration, or even just made you smile, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts for more conversations like this. And if you're looking for guidance with a creative challenge or want to advance a dream of your own, we'd love to help. Visit boardofdirectors.world. The Board of Directors is a global constellation of theater directors dedicated to building community, sharing knowledge, and transforming the role of the director in the 21st century. We convene and curate a fellowship that fosters mentorship, artistic inquiry, and collective care, transcending borders and institutions and traditions. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.